Hey friends, welcome to part 4 of our SpriteKit game. I'm Derek from TCI, and in part 4 we're going to blow up our aliens and we're going to blow up the player. We're going to look to do that in about 10 minutes, maybe 12, because we have to do some art. I'm going to begin today by starting with our Piscal website that we started with last time where we drew our alien. I'm going to start to build my animation by duplicating frames one at a time. So as you follow along with me here, you're going to see I'm just sort of filling in my animation. I like to use the duplicate frame, and then I like to be additive or remove or subtractive. So you'll see in the upper right that the animation that you're building is playing frame by frame, and you can set the frames per second, all that. I'm just going to go through here real quickly and try and edit this real time as much as I can. It's hard for me to do this without mistakes, so just bear with me. I'm essentially on each frame making the alien smaller and smaller. So I'm removing pixels on every frame of this animation. And then I'm going to add in some lines to represent some sparks. And I'll make those about 4 by 4. I've been doing this for a long time, many years. I've been making the same animation. And this works for me. So that's usually what I do is I'm a 4 pixel by 4 pixel spark or explosion. So you'll just see me duplicating the frame. On each frame, I'm going to go through and erase more and more of my sprite. So the alien gets smaller and smaller. And if you look on the right-hand side again, where the animation is previewing, you can kind of see where this is headed. So once I've got the sparks started, I'm just going to go ahead and animate them towards the edges of the screen, duplicate the frame again, and in the end, we'll have about 12 frames. So I'll start to remove the rest of the alien so that all that's left is the sparks. Okay, we'll do that. And so once I've got these laid out, I'll look for a spot in my code where I can destroy the alien, play this animation, and then remove him from the scene completely. And then later on in part 5, that'll be the hook for where we lay out, how many points did the player get for killing this alien? Almost there. Bear with me. Can only do this so fast. Frame 11, almost done. So my final frame will be completely blank. That helps me when I'm transitioning to removing it completely from the scene. I like there to be no texture assigned to the alien. Okay, so now you can see all the frames. You can see the animation previewing on the right-hand side. I'm just going to go ahead and export this as a zip file. And the prefix for all the files in the zip file is just going to be alien. And just confirm the settings. We download that zip file from Piscal, and then we expand it. And then what's going to be inside is those 12 frames named alien underscore and then the numbers 0, 0, 1, etc. So I'm going to go back into Xcode, go into my asset catalog, then we're just going to drag those in just like that. I'm going to right click on this and make a new folder with these items. The folder is just organizational. It doesn't affect the bundle, pathing, any of that stuff. It's just to keep this from being a giant list of images. All right, so I got my alien. It's time to make a function to provide to SpriteKit so we can blow these up. So I'm going to make a function here, and I'm just going to call it explode animation. That's going to return an SK action, and that action is going to be an animate action. So I need an array of textures. It's just going to be an empty array, and I'm going to do a for loop, and I'm just going to loop through all the things that are in that catalog that start with alien and end with a number. So I'll do frame named, and then I'll ask for the frame named 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And then I'll append that to my array. And then I'll define frame named in just a moment. So once I've got all the frames, all the textures loaded, I'm going to make an animation action. And that's just going to take the array of frames, and then it's going to want to know the time. It's just 1 divided by the frame rate that you want to have. Okay, so frame named is going to be an incoming string, and it's going to return a string. So we'll take a name string. Then we'll do a number, which is just going to be an int. And the way I'm going to build this string is I'm going to use the format argument. And what I'm going to feed this is I'm going to interpolate the variable for name. I'm going to add the underscore. Then I'm going to add up to 2 leading zeros. So 0, 2 right there. That's what that is. And then the arguments is an array. And inside that array, I'm just going to put one item, the number. So that's going to build a string. Now, I'm not likely to remember this, so we always put comments. Whenever you've got something you're not likely to come back and remember in 3-4 months, when you come back to this project for whatever reason, these comments will be really important. So I always like to put a sample of the output that I'm expecting from my functions. There we go. So now that we've got our notes, let's go find a spot in contact where we're currently removing the alien. There it is. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to remove this sprite from the scene by exploding it. And one of the first things we're going to need to do is remove the physics body. The reason we're removing the physics body is because it will keep calculating, it will keep reversing, it will keep achieving velocity, and we don't want that. So remove the physics body, then we run the task, and when the task is done, we'll remove the sprite completely from the scene, and we'll keep the part where we remove it from the set right away. Okay, so if we run it like that, we ought to be able to see it right off. There it is, looks almost good, but if you look closely, you can see that X. I screwed up a texture. So if we look at the images in our catalog, it actually stops at 11, but I counted to 12. I don't know. I always make this mistake with arrays. So 0 to 11, 0 to 11. That's the correct number of frames. Now we have it accurate. Okay, so we'll run that again. It will just confirm that that looks good, and it does. Looks fantastic. Really happy with the way they're exploding. Animation looks great. Frame rate's right. Now it's time to blow up the player. So let's get in there immediately. Back to Piskel, we'll create a new sprite. And the player being just a triangle, this will be really easy to do. I want to simulate the player sort of exploding. And so in order to do that, I'm going to just draw the 3 sides of the triangle as individual sprites. And then I'll overlap them. So sprite, overlap, overlap, overlap. And then once they're all overlapped, I'll remove the actual main player, and then the sprites that are the pieces will be all that's left. And then I can set them moving in a certain direction by applying physics calculations to it. So I'll just create these 3 real quick, fill that in, and then it's the same thing. We're going to go to, there we go, 0. There they are. I hit that button without meaning to. Get out of there. All right, there we go. So I've got my 3 individual pieces of the player. I'm going to, again, export it as a zip file, and we'll call it a player piece, player underscore pieces, piece. We'll download this. We'll expand that zip file. And so, again, there'll be just the 3 images inside, and then we're going to drag them into the assets catalog again. So we'll go back to Xcode, open up assets catalog, go to my download folder, drag those images in. And then again, I like to make a folder from the selection by right-clicking. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, again, but I do it just to keep this scene nice and neat. So those are the player pieces. There they are. Fantastic. So now we need to go into the game scene. Oh, actually, start with the player. Let's chop out the physics stuff and make a function to set up the physics. We're going to need to remove the player from the physics engine, but then re-add it. And so if we have a function that can add it, we can call that function and put the player back into the simulation after having removed the player. So now we'll go find the explode animation, and then just below it, we'll explode the player as well. So let's start with that. We'll just call it explode player. And then first things first, if the player's already been exploded, we don't want to explode him more than once. And one of the ways that I detect that is I hide the player by making him invisible. And if he's invisible, we'll just return from this function. So if the player is active and visible, we'll show that we'll hide him. And then we'll make those 3 pieces. We'll bring them each into the scene. So I'll make a function called player piece in just a moment. Pieces, piece. Okay, singular, good. So that's part 1, 2, and 3. And we use the textures 0, 1, 2. And then make player piece. We have to define this. So let's define that now. Make player piece, we'll just take in the string that defines which image, and then we'll return from this a sprite node. Okay, so we'll make a sprite node with that image, whatever that is, image named, name. And then this piece is going to be in the exact same position that the player currently is. That way, we'll layer all three pieces on top of the player. It'll sort of simulate the triangle that the player currently is represented by. And then when we move these around separately, you'll see that they don't quite, they shatter the player. So in order to simulate a little bit of the explosion beginning, I'm going to offset the X position by a random amount. Not too much, just a little bit. I'm also going to offset the Y position so that the pieces start a little higher. They'll have a little bounce to them, which will help make it look like an explosion. And you can change this. You can do all kinds of stuff to this. This is actually kind of the fun part, where if you simulate different numbers and just plug in things, you can get a lot of interesting effects. You can add animations on top of this, like a puff of smoke or fire, whatever you're interested in. And for this one, I'm going to use a physics body that perfectly matches the triangular piece that I drew. So I'm going to use the texture that I load from my asset catalog as the physics body. I just use the size of the piece. There we go. And then once I've set up the physics body, I can set some things in motion to sort of represent, the explosion taking place. So for starters, the velocity that it has, it will inherit from the player. So if the player is moving sideways and it explodes, the pieces will go to the right or left. I have to unwrap that. There we go. And then this one, these will be affected by gravity and such. So we're going to have them collide with the wall and the wall only, nothing else. And then the category of this piece will be player. So even though they're just little pieces of the player, they're still the player. And then we're going to do a little something that is called restitution. And this is how bouncy it is. And we're going to set that to a very high number. The closer to 1 you get, the more bouncy the pieces will be. And then I'm also going to set an angular velocity, and that's going to be up to 2 radians, negative or positive. And that's like a speed of a twirl. So it's like setting it in motion with a little bit of a spin already on it. And my idea with that is that it would animate and bounce a little bit more excitedly, instead of just being like falling. It needs to be like an explosion is happening. So whenever you use constants like this, always put notes. Got to put notes. Very important. So notes are important whenever you might not remember why you did that later. Okay. Now that we've got those 3 pieces and they've got some physics information attached to them, we'll just add them to the scene right away. Part 1, part 2, part 3. Here we go. Add child. And then let's finish this up. Let's look at what the player is going to be doing while these pieces are bouncing around. So for about 1.5 seconds, the player will be invisible. After that amount of time, we're going to bring him back into the simulation. So we'll set the alpha back to 100%, and then we'll add the physics back. That's why we define that function. So that's what will happen to the player after 1.5 seconds. Then we're going to set the position of the player back to the beginning. He's currently invisible during this function. So I turned him invisible right at the outset. And now the position is going to be back where they started. And I'm going to set the physics body to nil. And that takes him completely out of the simulation. So it won't explode more than once and won't have any movement attached to him, anything like that. And then again, because I'm using a lot of constants, I'm going to describe what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. When I come back to this, I probably won't remember what 304 meant. So this is helpful. You don't have to do the notes, but I highly encourage it. Highly encourage it. Okay. Okay, so the game pieces will bounce around, and they're essentially just going to stay there forever. So we need a function to get rid of them. So I'll do that. We'll create a fade out action, so that while they're animating, or bouncing around, they'll slowly be leaving the scene. Wait, no, these don't get brackets. Sorry. I'm thinking. Okay, so we'll make a generic fade out action, and then we'll run it on the first piece. And after that action is completed, we'll just remove that piece from the scene. Then we'll do it again on part 2, run fade out, after fade out, remove it from the parent. Part 3, run fade out, and then after that's finished, remove it from the parent. So now that we've got that going, we have to call explode player somewhere. And we don't actually have any place to do that, so we need to detect if an enemy bullet has hit the player. So we'll go back to the did begin contact and we'll add some if statements looking for that scenario. And one of the things, I had to go and check my notes, so I'm a little rusty at this. Checking my notes, I relearned that this is not a deterministic function, the physics simulation. And what that means is that on my system, when I compile this application, it might play out a certain way, and on yours, it might play out completely differently. So I need to check both possibilities, that the player hit the enemy bullet or that the enemy bullet hit the player. And in both cases, we'll just call explode player. That'll fade him out, and it will be set. And then in touches ended, we don't want the player to be able to shoot if they're currently destroyed. So we're looking for, is the player visible? And if so, you can shoot. But if you're dead, no shooting is allowed. And then same thing for moving around when the player touches the screen. We don't want the player to move while the explosion animation is playing. So if the player's visible, then it will track the touches. And if it's not visible, we won't worry about it. Okay. Let's fix that typo on enemy bullet. Should have caught that. And there we go. So the player explodes. The pieces bounce off each other. They bounce, off the game field. You can see that the necessary amounts of velocity are there, and it's just a little past 10 minutes. So we'll take a break there. And in the next part, we'll do game over, we'll do score, we'll do extra lives, we'll do that sort of stuff. Okay, thanks for watching. See you on the next part. Thanks.